Lonely Prince notices bruises on his castle cook, but he did next shock the whole town. The clang of iron pots echoes through the castle kitchens. A woman's hands tremble as she hides dark bruises beneath her sleeves. But the young prince sees what no one else dares to notice. And when he steps forward defying tradition, defying his own court, his act of mercy sets fire to whispers from the kitchens to the throne. But this cook is not who she seems. Behind her quiet eyes lies a secret of fallen nobility. And, past the crown would rather keep buried. With scandal rising, a rival countess waiting to strike, and the threat of exile at dawn. One choice could destroy them both. Will the prince sacrifice duty for love? Or will the castle crush them before the truth can ever be revealed? Comment below and tell me where in the world you're joining from. And if this story made you pause for a moment, hit that subscribe button for more. Dawn crept slowly through the castle windows as Clara moved through the bustling kitchen, her quiet authority guiding the scullery maids in their morning tasks. The great hearth crackled and spat, filling the air with wood smoke and the promise of fresh bread. Copper pots gleamed dully in the firelight as servants hurried to prepare the morning meal. "Mary, mind the bread doesn't burn," Clara called softly to a young maid, her voice gentle but firm. "And Sarah, the broth needs stirring." She demonstrated the proper motion, her sleeves sliding back as she reached for the heavy iron ladle. The kitchen was her domain, a place where she could almost forget the life she'd left behind. Here, among the humble pots and pans, she found purpose in feeding those who served the castle. Yet even this simple piece was not truly her own. As Clara struggled to lift a massive copper pot filled with steaming broth, her arms trembling with the weight, an unexpected figure appeared in the doorway. Prince Leopold, his fine clothing stark, against the humble kitchen walls, stood watching with concern in his tired eyes. The servants immediately dropped into curtsies, but Clara could only manage an awkward bob while trying to keep the pot steady. To her surprise, the prince stepped forward, his hand half raised as if to help. "My lady, you appear to be struggling," he said, his voice carrying the refined accent of nobility, but touched with genuine worry. "And what's this?" His eyes fixed on the dark bruises marking her pale forearms. Clara's heart quickened. She carefully set down the pot, tugging her sleeves to cover the telltale marks. "Your Highness is too kind to notice," she murmured, keeping her eyes downcast as protocol demanded. "I merely struck myself against the copper pans while working. 'Tis nothing of concern." Behind her, she heard the soft tittering of the kitchen maids, quickly stifled. They knew the truth, how Master Brandt's temper grew worse with each empty wine bottle, how his hands left marks that no accident could explain. But fear kept their tongues still, as it kept Clara's own silence. Prince Leopold's brow furrowed, his gaze moving from Clara to the servants and back again. Something in their averted eyes and nervous movements spoke of secrets untold. He opened his mouth as if to press further, but a sharp rap at the door interrupted. "Your Highness," a liveried footman bowed stiffly. "Your presence is required in your chambers. The language tutor awaits." Leopold lingered a moment longer, his usual solitude forgotten in his concern. "If you ever need ... He began softly, but propriety sealed his lips before the offer could emerge. With a troubled glance, he allowed himself to be led away, leaving Clara standing amid the steam and smoke of her domain. The day passed in its usual rhythm of meals and cleaning, but evening brought no peace. As the kitchen slowly emptied of servants, Master Brandt stumbled in, his face flushed with wine and his mood dark as thunder. "The soup was too thin," he snarled, advancing on Clara as she cleaned the last of the cooking pots. "Their graces complained. And now I look the fool. I followed the recipe exactly as written," Clara replied evenly. Though her heart hammered in her chest, she could smell the sour wine on his breath. You dare contradict me? His hand shot out, fingers digging into her arm with bruising force. I'll teach you your place, you uppity. Neither of them noticed the shadow that fell across the doorway, where Prince Leopold stood frozen in horror. His midnight wanderings had led him back to the kitchen, drawn by the memory of those unexplained bruises. Now, as he watched the cruel grip of the drunken overseer, his hands clenched into tight fists. The prince's face, usually so composed, twisted with quiet rage as he witnessed the truth behind Clara's morning bruises. His knuckles whitened as he fought the urge to intervene immediately, knowing that a prince's direct interference could cause more complications than it solved. Master Brand continued his tirade, oblivious to their royal observer, while Clara stood straight-backed and silent, enduring with a dignity that spoke of deeper breeding than her current station suggested. The kitchen suddenly seemed too small, too dark, too charged with the dangerous collision of worlds that were never meant to meet. The next morning's pale light found Clara already at work in the kitchen, her movements careful and measured too. Avoid aggravating her fresh bruises. Her fingers trembled slightly as she stirred the great pot of porridge, watching the thick mixture bubble and pop. The kitchen maids worked quietly around her, casting worried glances at their beloved cook. When they thought she wasn't looking, a sack of flour slipped from Clara's aching arms, spilling white powder across the stone floor. Her heart seized with dread at the sound of heavy footsteps approaching. Clumsy wench! Master Brand's voice boomed through the kitchen. His face was red with rage and the previous night's wine. Do you know how much that costs? He grabbed Clara's arm roughly, fingers digging into yesterday's bruises. Clara bit back a cry of pain. I apologize, Master Brand. I will clean it at once. You'll pay for it from your wages, you will, he snarled, twisting her arm. The other servants shrank back, powerless to help. Release her. The quiet command cut through the kitchen like a knife. Every head turned to see Prince Leopold standing in the doorway, dressed in simple morning clothes. Though his attire was plain, his bearing was unmistakably royal. His eyes, usually gentle and distant, blazed with controlled anger. Master. Brand dropped Clara's arm as if burned. Your Highness, I was merely disciplining. Silence. Leopold's voice remained soft but carried an edge of steel. I witnessed your cruelty last night, and now again this morning. This ends today. The kitchen fell so quiet that the crackling of the hearth seemed thunderous. Clara pressed herself against the wall, hardly daring to breathe, as the prince addressed the gathered servants. Let it be known that Master Brand is hereby stripped of his position. Leopold's gaze swept the room. No servant in this castle will suffer such treatment while I draw breath. Guards! 2 guards appeared instantly, summoned by the prince's raised voice. Remove this man from the castle grounds. He is not to return. Leopold's command brought gasps from the assembled staff. Never had they seen a noble intervene so directly in the affairs of servants. Your Highness, please, Brand stammered, falling to his knees. I have served this castle for 15 years, and in those years you have brought shame to this household through your brutality. Leopold's words rang with finality. Take him away. The guards dragged the protesting overseer from the kitchen. Within moments, whispers began circulating through the servants' passages. By midday, the story had spread through every corner of the castle, how Prince Leopold himself had defended a mere kitchen cook against her tormentor. By evening, the tale had reached the town, where it was repeated in taverns and market squares with growing wonder in the noble quarters. The news caused quite a different stir. Ladies whispered behind their fans about the impropriety of a prince concerning himself with kitchen matters. Lords muttered about the dangers of encouraging the lower classes to expect such attention as night fell over the castle. Clara knelt alone in the small chapel near the kitchens. Candlelight flickered across the simple wooden altar as she bowed her head in prayer. Her bruised arms still ached, but it was her heart that felt most tender, torn between gratitude for the prince's intervention and fear of the attention it might bring to her carefully hidden past. "Grant me strength," she whispered to the shadows, "to bear whatever comes of this day's events." High above in his private chambers, Prince Leopold stood at his window, gazing out at the moon-touched castle grounds. The day's events played through his mind, but it was the strange sense of rightness that puzzled him most. All his life, he had followed the rigid protocols of court, feeling like a stranger in his own skin. Yet today, defending Clara had brought him a peace he hadn't known in years. He touched the cool glass of the window, watching his breath create a small circle of fog. For the first time since childhood, he felt truly awake, truly himself. Why had standing up for a kitchen cook filled the empty spaces in his soul? The question followed him as he turned away from the window, though the answer remained just beyond his grasp. Thunder cracked across the darkened sky as rain lashed against the castle windows. Prince Leopold made his way down the torch-lit corridors toward the kitchens, his footsteps echoing on the stone floors. The usual bustle of serving staff had quieted as evening approached. Leaving the passage's eerily empty he found Clara alone in the kitchen, setting fresh loaves to cool on wooden racks. The hearth's warm glow cast dancing shadows on the walls. As she worked, her movements graceful despite her recent injuries. She startled at his entrance, quickly dropping into a curtsy. "Your Highness," she murmured, keeping her eyes lowered. "How may I serve you?" "Please," Leopold said softly. "I came to see how you fare after yesterday's events." He moved closer, noting how she tensed slightly. "You need not fear me." Clara's hands twisted in her apron. "You are most kind, my lord, but I am well enough." Lightning flashed through the high windows, illuminating her face. In that brief moment, Leopold caught something in her bearing, a certain poise that seemed at odds with her station. He had noticed it before in small ways. Her perfect posture even when scrubbing pots, the graceful tilt of her head, the refinement in her speech. "There is more to you than meets the eye, is there not?" he asked gently. Clara's shoulders stiffened. She glanced toward the door as if planning escape, then seemed to come to some internal decision. "Your Highness is perceptive. Will you tell me the truth of it?" She was silent for several long moments, broken only by the rumble of thunder. Finally, she spoke in a low voice. "I was not always a cook, my lord. Once, I was Lady Clara Rothschild of Emberley Estate." Leopold's eyes widened in recognition. "The Rothschilds?" "But their lands were seized for treason a decade past." "False charges, your Highness," Clara said, a flash of old pain crossing her features. "My father's enemies in court planted evidence of conspiracy when he and my mother were—" She swallowed hard. "When they were gone, I fled. I took work in the kitchens under a false name, knowing none would think to look for a noble's daughter among the servants." "All these years you have hidden yourself away?" Leopold asked, his heart aching at the quiet dignity in her bearing. "What choice had I? Those who orchestrated my family's fall still hold power at court. I found peace here in honest work." She gave a small, sad smile. "The kitchen staff became my family. Even Master Brand's cruelty seemed a small price for safety." Leopold moved closer, drawn by an impulse he couldn't name. "Your secret is safe with me," he promised softly. "I admire your courage to face such loss, yet keep your grace and kindness. I have seen how the other servants look to you, how you treat even the lowest scullery maid with dignity, while you treat even the lowest cook with the courtesy of a gentleman," Clara replied, meeting his eyes for the first time. Something electric passed between them in that gaze. making Leopold's breath catch Dot in all his years at court. Surrounded by scheming nobles and artificial pleasantries, he had never encountered such genuine strength of character. Clara's quiet resilience, her ability to find purpose in serving others despite her own wounds, awakened something in his heart he hadn't known was sleeping. The storm gradually quieted outside, its fury spending itself against the castle walls. Clara gathered her shawl, preparing to retire to the servants' wing. "I should go, Your Highness." "Thank you for your discretion." Leopold watched her leave, then climbed the grand staircase to his private chambers. He stepped out onto his balcony, the rain-washed air cool against his face. Below, a small figure hurried across the courtyard, Clara, making her way to the servants' quarters. His hands gripped the stone balustrade as conflicting emotions warred in his chest. As crown prince, he had obligations to the kingdom, expectations to fulfill. Yet for the first time in his life, duty felt like a cage, keeping him from something far more precious than power or position. He stood there long after Clara had disappeared from view, watching the clouds part to reveal the first stars of evening, his heart heavy with newfound devotion he dared not name. The morning sun streamed through the castle windows as Prince Leopold made his way to the kitchens once again. His visits had become more frequent over the past few days, though he always arrived with carefully crafted excuses. Today, he carried an empty herb basket, claiming the royal physician had requested fresh rosemary for healing tonics. Clara was already in the castle's herb garden when he found her, her apron dusted with morning dew as she knelt among the fragrant plants. She looked up at his approach, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. "Your Highness," she murmured, starting to rise. "Please, stay as you are," Leopold said quickly, kneeling beside her on the damp earth. "I thought perhaps you might need help carrying the morning's harvest." A small smile touched her lips. "The herbs are light enough for one person, my lord." "Then I shall simply have to learn their names and uses," he replied, settling more comfortably on the ground. "Tell me about this one." He gestured to a sprawling plant with tiny purple flowers. As Clara explained the properties of thyme and sage, lavender and mint, Leopold found himself captivated not just by her knowledge, but by the gentle animation in her face. She spoke of each plant like an old friend, describing how they soothed fevers or flavored broths. When she mentioned missing her mother's herb garden from childhood, Leopold shared his own memories of hiding from his tutors in the castle's greenhouses. "I used to count the minutes until I could escape their endless lectures on proper deportment," he admitted, helping her gather bundles of herbs into his basket. "And now?" Clara asked softly. "Now I count the minutes until I can escape the endless posturing at court." Their eyes met briefly before both looked away. Later that morning, Leopold lingered in the kitchen as Clara prepared the day's bread. When she began kneading the dough with practiced movements, he stepped closer, fascinated. "Would you teach me?" he asked impulsively. Clara's eyes widened. "Your Highness, your hand's the flour. No better than any other hands," he finished, firmly rolling up his sleeves. She hesitated only a moment before portioning out some dough. "Like this," she demonstrated, pressing and folding the soft mass. "Push with your palms, then turn and fold." Leopold's first attempts were clumsy, drawing quiet laughter from Clara as the dough stuck to his fingers. Her own laughter seemed to surprise her, and she quickly stifled it. But Leopold's heart lifted at the sound. "No, please," he said. "I enjoy hearing your happiness." Their shared laughter rang out again, drawing curious glances from the other kitchen staff, who tried to hide their amazement at seeing their prince covered in flour. Learning to bake like a common cook. As days passed, Leopold found more reasons to seek Clara's company. In the evenings, after the kitchen fires had died down, he would suggest walks through the garden paths. They stayed carefully within sight of the castle, but away from the most trafficked areas, their paths lit by hanging lanterns that cast a gentle glow. During these walks, they spoke of deeper things: Clara's fears after losing her family home, Leopold's loneliness amid the artificial warmth of court life. Sometimes they walked in comfortable silence, simply sharing the peace of the evening air and each other's presence. The servants whispered, of course. They saw their prince helping with tasks far beneath his station, noticed the soft glances between him and Clara, but none dared speak openly of what they observed. Some smiled secretly, touched by the growing tenderness between the unlikely pair. Others frowned, concerned about propriety and station. That night, Clara lay on her small cot in the servants' quarters, a contentment she hadn't known in years warming her heart. She touched her fingers to her cheeks, still feeling the echo of her laughter from their bread-making lesson in his chambers high above. Leopold sat at his writing desk, a single candle illuminating the pages of his journal. His ink-stained fingers moved steadily across the paper as he wrote. For so long, I have walked these halls feeling hollow, surrounded by people, yet utterly alone. But now, in the simplest of moments, flower-covered hands, shared laughter, quiet conversations in the garden, I find my heart is no longer empty. It fills with something warm and real, as fresh as newly baked bread, as sweet as morning herbs, as precious as her smile. He closed the journal carefully, watching the candlelight flicker against the walls of his chamber, and for the first time in years the vastness of his royal apartments didn't feel quite so lonely. The great hall buzzed with excitement as servants rushed to prepare for the evening's grand banquet. A month had passed since those quiet moments in the garden, and now the castle was alive with activity. Visiting Saxon nobles would arrive by sunset, and every surface had to gleam. In the kitchen, Clara stood calm amid the chaos, directing her staff with gentle authority. The air was rich with the scent of roasting venison and freshly baked bread. She had spent days planning this feast, selecting only the finest ingredients and perfecting each recipe. "This will never do," Herr Vogel muttered, his steward's chain clicking as he paced the kitchen floor. "A mere cook overseeing such an important occasion? It goes against all tradition." He wrung his hands, glancing anxiously at the doorway. "The prince himself has commanded it," Clara replied softly, turning her attention to a pot of mulled wine. The sweet aroma of cinnamon and cloves rose with the steam. "Indeed I have," came Leopold's voice from the doorway. The kitchen staff immediately bowed or curtsied, but the prince's eyes sought only Clara. "I trust no one else to ensure our guests receive the finest hospitality." Herr Vogel's protests died on his lips as Leopold stepped further into the kitchen. Inhaling deeply, "The aromas alone tell me I have chosen wisely. Carry on, all of you." With a small smile directed at Clara, he departed. As evening fell, the great hall filled with nobility in their finest silks and velvets. Candlelight sparkled off golden goblets and silver plates. Clara supervised from a discreet corner, watching as her carefully prepared dishes were carried out by a parade of servants. The roasted venison emerged first, tender and perfectly seasoned. Next came platters of golden brown fowl stuffed with herbs and dried fruits. Crystal decanters of spiced wine circulated among the guests, who murmured in appreciation at its warmth and subtle flavors. But it was the final course that drew the loudest praise. Towers of delicate pastries and sugared fruits arranged like jewels on silver trays. Clara had spent hours crafting each piece, drawing on skills learned in her noble youth that she had carefully hidden until now. From his place at the high table, Leopold rose, lifting his goblet. The hall fell silent, honored. "Guests," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "I trust you have found tonight's feast to your satisfaction." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "Then you must join me in acknowledging the one responsible for this excellence." He turned, gesturing toward Clara's corner. "Step forward, if you would." Clara's heart hammered as she moved into the light. Her simple dark dress stood in stark contrast to the colorful finery around her, but she held herself with quiet dignity. "This woman," Leopold continued, "has shown rare skill and dignity in her service to this household. Tonight's feast is but one example of her exceptional worth." Gasps and whispers filled the hall. Nobles turned to stare at Clara, some with surprise, others with barely concealed disdain. A servant being praised so publicly by a prince? Unheard of? Clara felt her cheeks warm, but she kept her composure, bowing gracefully as protocol demanded. Yet beneath her calm exterior, her heart soared at Leopold's words, not just at the praise itself, but at his willingness to bestow it so openly. The feast concluded late into the night. As the guests retired and the great hall emptied, Clara returned to her kitchen to oversee the cleaning. The air was cooler now, quiet except for the soft clink of dishes and the crackle of dying fires. She was checking the last of the pantry stores when she heard familiar footsteps behind her. Leopold had slipped away from the retiring guests to find her here in this quiet moment. "Your feast was everything I knew it would be," he said softly, moving to stand beside her at the wooden preparation table. "You honor me too much, Your Highness," Clara replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Leopold," he corrected gently. "Here, in this moment, I am simply Leopold." His hand moved across the rough wooden surface, fingers brushing against hers. The touch was brief, delicate as a butterfly's wing, yet it sent tremors through them both. In that fleeting contact lay volumes of unspoken feeling, of growing affection that neither dared yet name. They stood in silence, hearts racing, aware of every breath between them. The kitchen's shadows wrapped around them like a cloak, offering a moment's sanctuary from the watching world. Both trembled with the weight of words unsaid, of emotions too powerful to voice. Morning sunlight streamed through the castle's tall windows, but its warmth did little to dispel the chill of whispers echoing through gilded corridors. Servants scurried past with downcast eyes, while nobles gathered in hushed clusters, their fans fluttering like nervous birds. Countess Adelaide swept through the morning room, her emerald silk gown rustling against marble floors. She found Prince Leopold alone by the window, his shoulders tense as he gazed out at the garden where he had walked so often with Clara. "Your Highness," Adelaide's voice cut through the silence. "I wonder if you might spare a moment for an old friend?" Her lips curved in a smile that did not reach her eyes. Leopold turned, his face carefully neutral. "Good morning, Countess. What brings you here so early? Surely you remember?" She moved closer, her voice dropping to a silken whisper. "Our fathers arranged everything when we were children. The announcement was to be made this Christmas." Her fingers brushed his sleeve. "Or have you forgotten our betrothal entirely?" The color drained from Leopold's face. In the midst of his growing feelings for Clara, this long-ago arrangement had slipped from his mind completely. "That was years ago," he managed. "Yet still binding." Adelaide's smile sharpened. "Unless you mean to dishonor both our houses for the sake of a kitchen maid." Leopold stiffened, but Adelaide was already turning away, her skirt swishing across the floor. "I would hate to see scandal touch the crown," she called over her shoulder. "Especially over someone who might not be quite what she seems." In the days that followed, Adelaide set her plans in motion. Her questions about Clara spread through the castle like poison through water. Where had this cook learned such refined manners? How did she speak so well? Who was she really? The truth, when Adelaide uncovered it, exceeded her darkest hopes. Ancient land records, disgraced noble lines, a family's fall from grace. It all led to Clara. The council dinner that evening glittered with candlelight and tension. Lords and ladies filled the great hall, their jewels winking in the golden light. Clara supervised from near the kitchens, unaware that Adelaide had carefully arranged for her presence. As the final course was cleared, Adelaide rose, her voice carrying across the suddenly hushed room. "My lords and ladies, I fear I must speak of a grave matter." She turned to where Clara stood frozen in the doorway. "We harbor a deceiver in our midst." The hall fell silent as Adelaide wove her accusations. She spoke of Clara's true identity, of land seized for treason, of a calculated plan to seduce the prince and reclaim lost power. She hid among servants, waiting for her chance. Adelaide's voice dripped with false concern. How clever, too. Play on His Highness's kind heart. Gasps and murmurs filled the hall. Clara stood pale, but straight-backed as guards appeared at her sides. Leopold half rose from his seat, but his mother's hand clamped down on his arm like iron. "Take her too." "My chambers," the Queen Dowager commanded, her voice arctic with disapproval. "We will deal with this ... privately." The Queen's private audience chamber felt colder than the deepest winter night. Clara knelt on the hard floor, her simple dress a stark contrast to the opulent surroundings. The Queen Dowager looked down from her chair of state, her face as remote as a frozen lake. "You have deceived this household," the Queen pronounced. "Concealed your identity, preyed upon my son's sympathies, and brought scandal to our court." She paused, each word falling like a stone. "You will leave these grounds before dawn. Should you ever return, or speak of what has passed here, imprisonment will seem a mercy." Leopold stood in the shadows, his hands clenched into fists. "Mother, please." Silence. The Queen did not even turn her head. "You will remember your duty to this crown, my son. The marriage arrangements stand." Clara's soft voice surprised them all. "I accept my punishment, Your Majesty." She rose with quiet dignity, her eyes meeting Leopold's for one brief, heartbreaking moment. "I never meant to bring discord to your house." Guards stepped forward to escort her away. Leopold watched helplessly as Clara was led from the chamber, knowing that his parents' will was law and that by dawn she would be gone. Clara's hands trembled as she folded her spare dress in the dim candlelight of her tiny room. The rough wool felt familiar beneath her fingers, a reminder of the years she had spent building a life of quiet dignity within these castle walls. Tears fell silently onto her worn apron, leaving dark spots on the fabric that had absorbed so many spills and stories. The single candle cast dancing shadows on the whitewashed walls as she gathered her few precious possessions, a small prayer book, a silver thimble that had belonged to her mother, and the dried lavender sprigs she kept to sweeten her dreams. Each item spoke of memories, both bitter and sweet, of a life carved out of necessity rather than choice. "I survived once," she whispered to herself, though her voice caught in her throat. "I shall do so again." A soft knock at her door made her start. She hastily wiped her eyes with her sleeve before turning. "Who calls at this hour?" "'Tis I," came a hushed voice she knew all too well. Her heart leaped and ached all at once. Clara opened the door to find Prince Leopold standing there, his fine clothes exchanged for simple dark garments. His face was drawn with concern, his eyes bright with purpose. Without waiting for permission, he stepped inside and closed the door. "You cannot be here, Your Highness," Clara protested, though her trembling hands betrayed her joy at seeing him. "If anyone should discover, let them discover," Leopold said with quiet intensity. "I will not stand by while they exile you for nothing more than being who you are." He took her hands in his touch gentle yet firm. "I cannot allow this injustice." "My prince," Clara whispered, "you must. Your duty to the crown." "My duty?" Leopold's voice was thick with emotion. "I have done my duty every day of my life. I have lived in gilded rooms and felt nothing but hollow. Until you." He raised one hand to brush away a tear from her cheek. "Until I saw your kindness to the lowest scullery maid, your quiet strength, your grace in the face of cruelty." Clara's heart thundered in her chest. "Please," she begged, "do not ruin yourself for my sake. I could not bear it." "Then hear me well," Leopold said, his voice dropping to a fervent whisper. "I love you, Clara. Not your noble birth, not your skills in the kitchen, but your heart, your true and beautiful heart." The words she had scarcely dared to dream of hearing fell like blessed rain upon her soul. "And I love you," she confessed, her voice breaking. "Heaven help me. I have loved you since you defended me that day in the kitchen. But because I love you, I must go. Your kingdom needs you. The kingdom needs truth more than it needs empty traditions," Leopold declared. "I would rather be ruined with you than rule 1,000 years without you by my side." Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten, the first gray hints of dawn creeping over the horizon. The sound of wheels on cobblestones echoed up from the courtyard. The carriage that would take Clara into exile was arriving. "They await me below," Clara said softly, reaching for her small bundle of belongings. Leopold's jaw set with determination. Let them wait. He moved to the window, watching as the carriage drew to a stop before the castle gates. "I have spent my life watching from windows like this one, seeing life happen below while duty held me apart. No more." He turned back to Clara, his eyes filled with a fire she had never seen before. "I go now to the council chamber. Before this day is done, much will change in this kingdom." He took her hand once more, pressing it to his lips. "Trust in me, beloved. Trust in us." Clara's heart soared even as fear gripped her. "What will you do?" "What I should have done long ago," Leopold answered. "Stand firm for what is right, no matter the cost." He straightened his shoulders, every inch a prince despite his simple clothes. "Wait here until I send word. Promise me." "I promise," Clara whispered, watching as he slipped from her room like a shadow in the growing light dot through her small window. She could see the waiting carriage, its dark bulk a reminder of her intended fate. But for the first time since the Countess had exposed her truth, Clara felt something other than despair. Whatever came next would change everything. For her, for Leopold, for the kingdom itself. Dawn was breaking over the castle walls, painting the sky in shades of pearl and gold. As Clara stood at her window and Leopold strode toward the council chamber, each step carrying him closer to a defiance that would shake the very foundations of the realm, dawn crept over the castle walls, painting the cobblestones of the town square in pale golden light. The morning air was crisp and clear, carrying the scent of fresh bread from nearby bakeries. Yet there was no joy in the gathering crowd, only tense whispers and worried glances as townspeople filed into the square, summoned to witness Clara's exile. Clara stood beside the waiting carriage, her few belongings packed in a small cloth bundle at her feet. Though her face was pale, she held herself with quiet dignity, her back straight and her chin lifted. She wore her old servant's dress, cleaned and pressed one final time, a statement of the honest work that had sustained her through years of hiding. The Countess Adelaide watched from the castle steps, a satisfied smile playing at her lips as she stood among the gathered nobles. Her victory seemed complete, the deceiver exposed, the threat to her betrothal eliminated, order restored to their rigid world of privilege and power. The murmuring of the crowd fell silent as the castle doors swung wide. But instead of the royal guard, Prince Leopold emerged alone. He wore no fine silk or jewels, but simple dark clothing that might have belonged to any merchant's son. A collective gasp rose from the assembled townsfolk as he strode purposefully across the square toward Clara. "Good people of our town," Leopold's voice rang out clear and strong, carrying to every corner of the square. "You have been summoned to witness an exile, but instead you shall witness the truth." He reached Clara's side and took her trembling hand in his. "This woman stands accused of deception, of hiding her noble birth while serving as our castle cook. Yet I tell you she is no deceiver. She is the truest noble I have ever known." Countess Adelaide's face darkened with fury. She started forward, but Leopold's next words stopped her cold. "Nobility lies not in titles or lands, but in the heart. I have watched Clara treat every soul in this castle with dignity and kindness, from the lowest scullery maid to the highest lord. I have seen her work tirelessly, nurturing others with not just food for the body, but warmth for the spirit." His voice softened as he turned to face Clara directly. "When I was lost in the hollow rituals of court life, your genuine spirit awakened my heart. You showed me that true worth comes not from birth or station, but from how we treat our fellow beings." Then Leopold turned to face the Countess, his voice ringing with authority. "I hereby renounce any arranged betrothal to Countess Adelaide. Such loveless alliances perpetuate the very barriers that divide us." The crowd stirred uneasily at this unprecedented declaration. Adelaide's face twisted with rage, but before she could speak, Leopold continued. "Instead, before all assembled, I declare my intent to wed Clara, not for her hidden noble blood, but for the far greater nobility of her character. Let any who would oppose us speak now." Silence fell over the square. Even the birds seemed to hold their song. Clara's eyes filled with tears as she stared up at Leopold, scarcely daring to believe this moment was real. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, a cheer erupted. It was quickly joined by another and another, until the entire square rang with the joyful voices of townspeople and servants alike. The kitchen staff, who had slipped out to witness the proceedings, fell to their knees in respect, not for Leopold's title, but for his courage in choosing love over convention. Clara's legs trembled beneath her as the full impact of Leopold's words washed over her. All the years of hiding, of fearing discovery, of loneliness, they dissolved in the warmth of his unwavering gaze. Her composure finally broke, and she collapsed into his waiting arms, overcome with relief and awe. Leopold held her close, supporting her weight as naturally as he had supported her spirit through all their quiet moments together. The morning sun caught the tears on Clara's cheeks, making them sparkle like diamonds as she buried her face against his chest. Around them, the cheers of the townspeople rose to the heavens, heralding not just the union of two hearts, but the breaking of ancient barriers between class and station. The Countess Adelaide stood frozen on the castle steps, her carefully laid plans crumbling before her eyes as she watched the common folk bow their heads in reverence to this most uncommon love. The morning that was meant to see Clara's shame and exile had instead become a triumph of heart over privilege, of love over tradition, that the grand hall of the castle echoed with angry voices. King Frederick's face had turned crimson with rage as he paced before his throne, his royal robe swishing against the marble floor. The Queen Dowager sat rigid in her chair, her fingers gripping the armrests until her knuckles turned white. "You dare defy your sacred duty to the crown," the king thundered at Leopold, who stood calm before them. This common cook, she is anything but common, father," Leopold replied steadily, "and the people know it." Around them, nobles had divided into heated groups. Duke Aldrich, his beard quivering with indignation, denounced the match as an affront to noble blood. But Baron Wesley, who had tasted Clara's cooking and seen her gentle leadership in the kitchens, spoke in her defense. "The prince shows wisdom beyond his years," the Baron declared. "Perhaps it is time we look to character rather than solely to birth." Father Thomas, the castle's elderly chaplain, cleared his throat softly. "Your Majesties, I must remind court that marriage bans require readings on 3 consecutive Sundays. Unless, of course, a special license is granted. Outside the castle walls, the sounds of gathering crowds drifted through the high windows. The townspeople had begun collecting signatures, demanding Clara be allowed to stay. Market women who had bought her kitchen herbs, merchants who had supplied her kitchens, servants who had worked under her kind direction, all added their names to hastily drawn petitions. The king's face darkened as reports of the growing crowd reached him. He had seen how the people cheered for Leopold in the square, how they bowed to Clara with genuine respect. The kingdom had not seen such unity between common folk and nobles in living memory. Finally, the king raised his hand for silence. To prevent unrest, he said stiffly, we shall grant the special license, but mark me well, this sets no precedent. Countess Adelaide, who had been watching from a shadowed alcove, turned away in humiliation. Her carefully woven schemes had unraveled like cheap thread, leaving her with nothing but bitter defeat. In the quiet of the castle chapel, Clara knelt before the altar, her heart overflowing with gratitude. Candlelight danced on the stone walls as Leopold entered silently and knelt beside her. He took her hand in his, their fingers intertwining with certainty that had replaced all doubt. Together, they bowed their heads in prayer, their hearts beating. As one with faith and hope. The church bells of St. Michael's Chapel rang out across the morning air, their joyful peals echoing through the cobblestone streets. Inside, sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across the packed pews where nobles sat shoulder to shoulder with merchants and servants. Alike a sight never before witnessed in the kingdom's history. Herr Vogel, the castle steward, stood proudly at the chapel's entrance, his usually stern face softened with emotion. Beside him, Clara waited in an ivory gown of finest silk, simple yet elegant in its clean lines and subtle embroidery. Her dark hair was crowned with white roses, and her eyes sparkled with happy tears. "My lady," Herr Vogel whispered, offering his arm. "It would be my greatest honor." The words held special meaning, coming from a man who had once viewed her with such suspicion. As the organ music swelled, Clara placed her hand on the steward's arm. Together, they began the slow procession down the aisle. Servants who had worked alongside her in the kitchens dabbed at their eyes. Noble ladies who had once scorned her now inclined their heads respectfully as she passed. At the altar, Prince Leopold stood waiting, his face transformed by joy. He wore his formal court attire, but his eyes held none of their former loneliness. When Clara reached him, Herr Vogel placed her hand in Leopold's with a deep bow that acknowledged both his duty and his blessing. The elderly chaplain's voice rang clear through the hushed chapel as the couple exchanged their vows. "With this ring I thee wed," Leopold proclaimed, his voice steady and sure. Clara's response came from her heart, carrying all the quiet strength that had sustained her through years of hardship. As they turned to face their gathered witnesses, now husband and wife, the chapel erupted in cheers that bridged all social divisions. Hand in hand, they walked back down the aisle and out into the bright morning sun, where the town square had become a sea of celebrating people. Rose petals rained down from every window, toting the cobblestones in pink and white. Clara's hands once bearing the marks of cruel treatment were now clasped firmly in Leopold's, their fingers intertwined. Her smile radiated pure joy as she stood beside him, finally free to be herself, finally home. The townsfolk's cheers echoed off the ancient stone walls, welcoming their prince and his bride, a union that promised to reshape their kingdom's future, where true nobility would be measured by the content of one's character rather than the dire circumstance of one's birth. If something in this story whispered to your spirit, stay a while. Subscribe and come back tomorrow. The next story may be the one you didn't know you needed.